p.m. Wednesday. any business of any economy. These developments can affect our investments. They can get complicated. But we will make sense of them all right here on The Exchange, where your business is our business on CNN Philippines.
This is Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines. I'm Pio Ontiveros. Tonight on the program, President-elect Bongbong Marcos reveals the members of his economic team, including Bangko Sentral Governor Benjamin Diokno, who will head the finance department. More COVID-19 cases coming out of Palawan. A group of 14 tourists and 2 crew members tested positive for the disease. Authorities are checking their samples for variants. And the queen of Philippine movies, Susan Roses, finally laid to rest next to her husband, the King, Fernando Poe Jr. A day after his proclamation as president-elect, Bongbong Marcos names more key people to his cabinet, including the team that will steer the economy for the next 6 years. Rex Remigio gives us the bigger picture of the new appointments live from the Marcos campaign headquarters in Mandaluyong City. Rex, who is at the helm of his economic managers?
Well, first, the country's recovery from the economic crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic is the main priority of the incoming Marcos administration. That's why many would like to know the composition of his economic team, since it can dictate the future of millions of Filipinos. They have to respond to rising prices of basic goods, oil, and on how the government can pay its ballooning debts.
Bangko Sentral Governor Ben Diokno may not be able to finish his term, supposedly to expire July next year. Diokno has already accepted the offer of President-elect Bongbong Marcos to be the next finance secretary. He will be replaced by Monetary Board member and former socio-economic planning chief Felipe Medalla. They will have to solve some pressing challenges affecting the lives of many Filipinos. The next economic managers will have to decide on whether or not they can reduce income taxes mandated under the Train Law, as well as deal with the Finance Department's proposal of increasing taxes in many products and services so the government will have more money. Marcos, however, admits he has no decision yet as they're still studying the proposals.
Yung mga pabigla-bigla na tinataas, binababa, hindi natin magagawa yun dahil kung gawin natin yan, it will, if there are too many moving parts, you cannot anticipate what will happen.
He is also still studying if government can afford to suspend the oil excise tax amid the rising petroleum prices in the global market.
First of all, we cannot control prices. Hindi tayo price giver, price taker tayo sa oil market.
Aside from Diokno and Medalla, BBM also nominates Fred Pascual as the next Trade and Industry Secretary. Pascual is the former president of the University of the Philippines and now president of the Management Association of the Philippines. Marcos also designates SMC Tollways President and CEO Manny Bonoan to be his Public Works and Highways Secretary. Bonoan once served as DPWH Undersecretary during the time of Presidents Erap Estrada and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. He's expected to continue President Duterte's Build infrastructure program. As he continues to complete his economic team, he believes they are on a good start, despite worries of some investors and analysts about the future state of the economy under the Marcos administration.
On his campaign promise of lowering the price of rice to 20 pesos per kilo, he clarifies that it's an aspiration and they have to do many reforms which will take several years. He also did not say if that will happen under his administration. Back to you, Pia.
Rex Remigio there reporting. But Rex, before I let you go, what about the other positions in other government agencies? Does President-elect Marcos have any nominees so far?
He designated his close friend and former Davao del Norte Congressman Anton Lagdameo as the special assistant to the president. We can recall that President Duterte created the position for his longtime aide and now Senator Bongo. But for other agencies like the Bureau of Customs and Internal Revenue, he says they're still in the process of looking for potential nominees. Pia.
Rex and Media there reporting. Business groups are optimistic about the policies of President-elect Bongbong Marcos's economic team. The influential Makati Business Club, or MBC, says the appointments, quote, should boost the confidence of local and foreign businesses that the new administration will promote liberalizing but inclusive policies that will accelerate job creation, competition, and economic recovery, unquote. The British Chamber of Commerce also expects the economy to further open up and for the incoming administration to ratify a regional trade agreement while continuing to spend on public infrastructure.
We expect to see continuity. We expect to see further economic liberalisation. And also, I'd just like to say we'd like to see pass now actually ratification of the RCEP, which is the trade agreement. And going forward, we see further investment in the economy, the infrastructure.
The Chamber went on to say that it looks forward to working with the new administration. Well, aside from his economic measures, Marcos brings up the government's war on drugs. Speaking to select members of the media, he got to discuss the matter. Well, he says he got to discuss the matter with President Rodrigo Duterte. Marcos reveals they met several times, even before the elections. He also says Mr. Duterte can join his administration as a drug czar if he wants to, although they have not talked about it.
One thing that he was very assertive about was that ituloy mo yung anti-drug syndicate na sinimulan ko. Do it your own way. He really said that. Do it your own way. Palitan mo, gawin mo yung gusto, pero wag mong iiwanan yan dahil kawawa ang kabataan natin. Talagang nasisira ang mga buhay nila.
Mr. Duterte's drug war has killed around 6,000 alleged drug offenders based on government records, but human rights groups say the number is much higher. A historic proclamation with another Marcos and another Duterte holding the top two posts in government. Bongbong Marcos as president-elect more than 3 decades after his father's regime was toppled by a peaceful revolt. And Sara Duterte as vice president-elect, just as her father is about to end his term as chief executive. With the country still suffering from the impact of the pandemic, along with high consumer prices and rising government debt, Amor Santos tells us Marcos has an appeal to the Filipino people.
I ask you all, pray for me, wish me well. I want to do well because when a president does well, the country does well. And I want to do well for this country.
This is what Bongbong Marcos said shortly after being proclaimed president-elect. He says he's humbled by the trust and confidence given to him by the people. He also commits to do his best.
To have received over 31 million votes from our countrymen is as valuable a expression of trust as can be had by anyone in public life. And so for that, I thank our people. And beyond that, I promise you that we may not be perfect, but we will always strive to perfection. Thank you very much.
Marcos congratulated the Commission on Elections, poll workers, and the National Board of Canvassers for a job well done.
In my experience, the best run election that we have seen, and that it has reflected truly the voice of the people and the choice of the people.
In 2016, Marcos filed an election protest against Vice President Leni Robredo. After 5 years of fighting, the Supreme Court unanimously junked the case. In the race to Malacanang, the Marcos camp rallied for unity and continues to do so.
His offering is his unifying brand of leadership. He is now the president-elect. He's been proclaimed by the joint houses of Congress, and he will be president of all Filipinos. He will be president of every Filipino.
Unsurprisingly, the winner's camp is still plagued by controversies involving the Marcos family. Marcos spokesperson shot down a question about next year's commemoration of the People Power Revolution, which ousted dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Vice President-elect Sara Duterte, for her part, dedicated her victory to the victims of terrorism, abuse, criminality, and bullying. Her message to public servants and Filipinos.
To the Commission on Elections, our teachers, police, and soldiers, and the honorable members of Congress in joint session, thank you for a generally peaceful and orderly election. Magtulungan tayo para sa isang bayan na mapayapa at nagkakaisa. Mahal natin ang Pilipinas.
Amor Santos, CNN Philippines.
So what do the Marcoses think about their return to Malacanang? For Senator Amy Marcos, her brother's victory is a second chance and a restoration of faith and confidence in their family.
Kung tutuusin, hindi masyadong mahalaga yung pagbabalik sa palasyo. What's most important to us is, of course, our name, the family name that has become so controversial and so difficult at times to bear. The legacy of my father is what we hope will be clarified at last.
Amy Marcos also says their mother, Imelda, seemingly stopped showing signs of aging upon hearing that her only son won.
Well, siyempre, yung nanay ko sobrang excited. Sobrang excited niya at tuwan-tuwa siya sa mga pangyayari. She's suddenly able to hear, to walk, lahat ng sakit-sakit nung panahon ng COVID, lahat ng nararamdaman, biglang nawala, maliksi, at parang hindi na siya ulit 92, kundi 29.
Despite a graft conviction in 2018, the Sandigan Bayan allowed Imelda to post bail of 300,000 pesos, partly because of her age and state of health. She was 89 years old then. Imelda was sentenced to serve 6 to 11 years in prison for illegally funneling at least $352 million to Swiss foundations when she was governor of Metro Manila in the 1970s. Coming up, the last batch of winners for the May 9 elections have been proclaimed. 55 party list groups will form part of the 19th Congress, which opens in 2 months. Plus, more tourists who went diving at the Tubataha Reef in Palawan test positive for COVID-19. The details right here on Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
Fried chicken? Timplang happy. Tocino? Timplang magandang gising. Inasal? Ito, medyo timplang umuusok. Galit-galitan. Spicy? Timplang hot na hot. With easy-to-cook Magnolia Chicken Timplados. Iba't ibang sarap ng chicken, kaya. Ikaw, anong Magnolia Chicken Timplados mo? Iba't ibang easy chicken sarap.
Making life sweet is easy dahil 35 pesos SRP lang ang San Miguel flavored beer. Swak sa budget, panalo sa sweetness.
Uy, sweet!
Make life sweet with San Miguel flavored beer.
This is Newsnight on CNN. Philippines Congress has proclaimed the winning... COMELEC, the Commission on Elections, has proclaimed the winning party lists for the incoming 19th Congress. Joining us for more details is Melissa Lopez, reporting live from the Philippine International Convention Center in Pasay. Mel?
The 55 party list will officially form part of the 19th Congress, which opens in July. The PICC was filled to capacity as two officials for the party list sat up in front for the ceremony, went up to the stage to accept their certificates of proclamation, and posed for the traditional hand-raising gesture. 63 seats were up for grabs for 177 contenders. COMELEC went ahead with today's event but only proclaimed the winners for 62 seats. The list is on your screen. That's because the group United Senior Citizens, ranked 37th, was excluded as its registration as a party list was denied. The case is still on appeal before the COMELEC and Bank. However, longtime party lists Kabataan and Gabriela have been proclaimed with one seat each despite a request from the government's NTF-LCAC to cancel their registration. Who will be part of the next Congress? 15 of the 55 party lists are first-timers. The rest have representatives serving as lawmakers since 2019. Meanwhile, some of the long-serving party lists in previous Congresses did not make it, like Buhay and Bayan Muna. Some party lists are represented by the likes of religious leader Brother Eddie Villanueva for Sivac, TV host Carla Estrada for Tingog, Senator Bong Revilla's son Brian for Agimat, and Senator-elect Rafi Tulfo's wife Jocelyn for ACT-CIS. Others led by showbiz icons did not make it. But here is COMELEC's explanation.
Whether they belong to the sector that they represent or they are advocate of the sector that they represent.
There were some awkward moments as the Magsasaka and Senior Citizens Party List had warring factions with two sets of nominees present today. COMELEC decided not to hand over the certificate nor raise any hands pending resolution. P3PWD of former COMELEC Commissioner Rowena Guanzon did not send any representatives, leaving the stage empty. Anti-crime group ACT-CIS topped the race and got 3 seats, while those in the second to 6th spots got 2 each. Transport Group 1 rider, Visayan Region Party List Tingog, Pro-Livelihood Group for Peace, Ako Bicol, and Sagip. The rest of the party list groups will field 1 representative each in the next Congress to help pass laws, craft a national budget, and maintain checks and balances for the Marcos Duterte administration. Back to you, Pia.
Melissa Lopez there reporting from the PICC Forum tent in Pasay. Activist groups condemning the police for supposed violence on protesters during the proclamation of President-elect Marcos on Wednesday. They warned the incident could just be a preview of how another Marcos administration will look like. George Cahilas reports.
The peaceful mass action at the Commission on Human Rights compound turned violent on Wednesday when authorities stopped the demonstrators from marching to the Batasang Pambansa, where the proclamation of winning presidential and vice presidential candidates took place. Protesters want the family of President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to be held liable for corruption and human rights violations during the martial law, and for the government to look into the supposed irregularities during the May 9 elections. Police officers in full battle gear clashed with the activists as water cannon was used to disperse them. 14 protesters were hurt during the commotion.
Hindi natin talaga inaasahan itong overkill reaction ng pulis. Sa tingin natin, uncalled for, unnecessary, na nag-inconvenience sa maraming motorista, commuters, tapos gumamit pa ng dahas.
The police meanwhile explains their action was part of the plan to ensure a peaceful and orderly conduct of the proclamation of the country's next leaders. They insist they exercised maximum tolerance. Protesters, however, argue that if maximum tolerance meant using water cannon and hitting people with sticks, then people just got a peek of what the new norm will be under the Marcos administration.
Ito pa ay pasilip kung sa mangyayari in the next 6 years. Yung paranoid reaction ng police, yung intolerance sa dissent.
The groups are set to discuss with the Commission on Human Rights the appropriate actions to be taken in connection with the violent dispersal on Wednesday, as they prepare for bigger protests in the coming days, leading to the inauguration of Marcos on June 30th. George Cahiles, CNN Philippines.
The Senate unanimously approves a bill creating the Bulacan Airport City Special Economic Zone and Freeport, or the Bulacan Eco Zone. This covers the new Manila International Airport, which will be the country's largest largest and most sophisticated gateway, and the Aero City, a sprawling complex of industrial, commercial, and government centers. All 21 centers present during Thursday's plenary session voted to pass the measure. The ecozone will be managed and operated as a separate customs territory to ensure a free flow of goods and capital. A Bulacan Ecozone Authority will be established with a corporate life of 50 years. The ecozone is seen to create job opportunities and help speed up economic recovery. More tourists that went diving at the Tubataha Reef in Palawan have tested positive for COVID-19. Experts are checking the samples of 14 foreign travelers and 2 local crew members for variants of concern. 5 of the tourists, or 5 of them, had mild symptoms after traveling to Puerto Princesa City last May 14th. All 16 individuals are now in isolation.
For now, ang hinihingi sa mga agencies, sa mga travel agencies sa ating tourism sector na is to monitor closely yung mga pumapasok na mga turista, and at the same time, ma-remind sila kung magkaroon man ng symptoms, may report agad. Nag-coordinate na rin sa provincial government kung ano yung magiging protocol sa mga foreign tourists, even local tourists na papasok dito sa Puerto Princesa. Ang recommendation, kung pwede yung mga turista na papasok ng Puerto Princesa, at least may antigen test. Kasi for now, nasa alert level 1 lang ang Puerto. Kaya hindi siya pwedeng i-require.
Last month, 12 cases from the Tubataha Reef tested positive for the Omicron subvariant BA.2.12.1. Experts have warned a COVID-19 surge may happen in the coming weeks, which is why officials are doubling efforts to urge people to get boosted. A ceremonial vaccination was held in Mandaluyong City for priority groups today. Overseas headlines, a community in the U.S. state of Texas is mourning the loss of 19 children and 2 adults who were shot and killed at an elementary school in the city of Uvalde. CNN's Chris Nguyen has chilling new details about the young man behind the incident.
A community heartbroken. Residents in Uvalde, Texas, mourning the loss of 19 children and 2 teachers who were tragically shot and killed at Robb Elementary on Tuesday. These are the faces of just some of the lives cut too short. 4th grade teacher Eva Morales, A. Mary Jo Garza, Jose Flores Jr., Uzziah Garcia, and Javier Lopez. All of them only 10 years old.
How do you look at this girl and shoot her? Oh, my baby, how do you shoot my baby?
Chilling new details emerging about the suspected gunman. Police say he shot his grandmother before going to the school and opening fire on a 4th grade class. Officials say he purchased 2 assault-style rifles for his 18th birthday.
What can you tell us about your grandson? Did you ever know he had firearms?
No, I didn't know. If I had known, I would have reported him.
As the community grapples with this horrific tragedy, politicians are demanding action to curb gun violence.
The idea that an 18-year-old can walk into a store and buy weapons of war designed and marketed to kill is, I think, just wrong.
I'm Chris Wynn reporting.
CNN obtained proof the gunman initially sent a series of messages to a girl he met online about his plans. Coming up on Newsnight, in Susan Ross's funeral earlier, friends and family look back at the star's impact beyond the film industry. Plus, who broke the Eastern Conference Finals tie in Game 5, the Miami Heat or the Boston Celtics? NBA updates after the break.
MX3 dahil ito ay napatunayang may alpha, beta at gamma mangosteen. MX3 capsule helps avoid pain discomfort para iwas sakit. Tested and proven na low sodium, cholesterol-free at fat-free. Dito ako sa tunay, natural at orihinal. MX3.
Mahalagang paalala, ang MX3 capsule ay hindi gamot at hindi dapat gamiting panggamot sa anumang uri ng sakit.
Land Bank has always believed that in this country, we have to dream big. And so we learned to build something out of nothing, improving the quality of life for our people so that we can keep in step with a brave new world and make our big dreams come true.
Welcome back. Veteran actress Susan Roses finally laid to rest today. How is she remembered by those who knew her behind the scenes? Our Paulo Barcelon reports.
17 years after her husband passed on, the Queen of Philippine movies is reunited with her king. Susan Roses was laid to rest past noon Thursday beside the tomb of Fernando Poe Jr. at the Manila North Cemetery. Her daughter, Senator Grace Poe, family, friends, and fellow actors were there to bid their last farewell. People close to Roses remembered her for two things: her kindness and the good times they had with the woman they call Tita Susan.
Alaga ako niyan mula nung bata ako, very thoughtful sa akin, laruan, tsokolate, ganyan. Lagi niya alala.
Napakalungkot po, sir. Kasi masyado malapit po ako sa pamilya nila. Naabutan niyo ako ng papel. Nakalagay ko sa papel kung saan ako pupunta ng restaurant. Kasi sabi niya sa akin, Ador, hindi ka na maiba sa pamilya.
May God give her a mercy. Before the funeral, a mass was held at the Heritage Park where the wake was held. Among those who visited last night, President Rodrigo Duterte, who met Senator Poe and her family. Poe and Duterte were once rivals for the presidency 6 years ago. But last night, the chief executive condoled with Senator Poe. Senator Grace earlier thanked the public for their overwhelming support, revealing that one of her late mother's most prized pieces of advice came from a line used in her first political ad in 2013.
So take, ginawa namin yung commercial. So after I said, sabi ni Susan, promise? And I said, promise po. Dinagdagan niya. Wala sa script. Sabi niya, pagbutihan mo. Perfect, di ba? Yan ang palagi niyang sinasabi na banta sa akin.
Her tomb still awaits its grave marker, but a handwritten note is left as the cement dries out for the day. It says JSP, the initials of Roses' real name, Jesusa Sonora Poe, followed by We Love You, words from her family, friends, and supporters, now that the Queen is finally reunited with her one and only, the King. Paulo Barcelon, CNN Philippines.
Moving on to sports news, Justin Baltazar from the De La Salle Green Archers is suiting up for the Hiroshima Dragonflies in Japan's B-League. The star athlete signed a contract with the Dragonflies for the 2022 to 2023 season. Big man Baltazar initially applied for the PBA rookie draft, but later withdrew his name. Now off to the NBA, the Boston Celtics snatched the Eastern Conference Finals lead at 3-2. The team defeated the Miami Heat in Game 5, 93-80, after an impressive turnaround in the third quarter. Now if the Celtics win Game 6 this Saturday, 8:30 a.m. Philippine time, they head to the finals. In the Western Conference Finals, it's do or die again for the Dallas Mavericks in Game 5 tomorrow at 9 a.m. The Golden State Warriors are a win away from advancing to the finals. After 19 seasons, the Ellen DeGeneres Show says goodbye tomorrow. The final episode is slated for Friday morning Philippine time. Ellen said, as fun as it is, it's just not a challenge anymore. She was the first lead actor in a sitcom to come out as gay back in 1997. A few years later, the Ellen DeGeneres Show was born. There were reports last summer of a toxic work environment, but Ellen now says this is not why she's ending the show, calling her staff her family. And that is it for now. Join me again on News.ph at 7 p.m. I'm Pio Ontiveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
This program is brought to you by
Sedentary living due to pandemic restrictions is leading to lifestyle diseases. For instance, people working from home are becoming less physically active and binging more on snacks that are higher in salt, fat, and unwanted sugar. One common condition resulting from these behaviors is hypertension, and one of the most dangerous and also one of the conditions. That is why it's called the silent killer, but it doesn't have to be. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and we'll bring you the knowledge and care you need, especially in this time of COVID-19. You're watching MedTalk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. Watching your blood pressure is important because your arteries carry blood from your heart to other parts of the body. Our guests today will talk about this topic and share their knowledge. Let's welcome Dr. Eduardo Yambao Jr. He's a cardiologist from the Asian Hospital and Medical Center. Also with us is Dr. Romel Punongbayan, who is an internal medicine and hypertension specialist from the Medical City Clark and Bulacan Medical Center. Most of the time, hypertension has no obvious symptoms to indicate that something is wrong. One thing you can do to protect yourself is by checking your blood pressure. In a blood pressure reading, there are two numbers, itong systolic and the diastolic. I'll start the conversation with Doc Ome. Please explain what this means and ano ba yung normal BP range na dapat makita natin?
The normal BP that we have to really attain is 120/80 and below. However, the technique of taking your blood pressure is really crucial. So if you do your blood pressure taking in a public place, probably you can have an inaccurate blood pressure reading. But in general, we have to really make sure that we are taking the blood pressure the right. So it has to be quiet, you have to be seated comfortably with your back support, your feet are flat on the floor, and your measuring device should be in the level of your heart. So however, most of the cases, I'm seeing a lot of technical errors. So it's really very crucial to take your blood pressure properly.
Now, a hypertensive crisis means that there's a severe increase in blood pressure, and one of the risk factors for this is a stroke. When this happens, the heart may not be able to pump blood properly. Dr. Ed, if one notices a spike in their BP, biglang pagtaas, what should their initial reaction be?
When there is a sudden spike in blood pressure, they should first check, number one, if they are into certain stressors which could cause elevated blood pressure. This would include probably they are in certain activities like exercise, or they're really shouty or laughter, or they may have a recent intake of food that may elevate your blood pressure, like salty food or foods high in fat or caffeinated drinks. After ruling this out, they have to also make sure that they properly took their medications. But if the blood pressure is still on the high side, then they might need to immediately consult with their attending doctor, or if it doesn't really go down, they should go to the emergency room.
Now, hypertension is one of the leading causes of illness and of premature death here in the Philippines. The usual suspects that may cause this are the food we eat. In the Philippines, we love to eat fatty and oily food such as adobo and sisig, which can contribute to an increase in someone's blood pressure. Dr. Ome, aside from a person's diet, what are some of the risk factors for hypertension?
Actually, the more common really risk factor for hypertension is number one, genetics. Then the more popular ones are alcohol intake, smoking, being sedentary or doesn't have any physical activity. Even obesity and diabetes mellitus are the more common risk factors for hypertension.
We already know that smoking is bad for our lungs, but it also increases our risk for heart disease as well as hypertension. Dr. Ed, explain naman natin yun. How does this happen naman? Why is smoking always the culprit sa lahat ng mga masamang bagay sa katawan?
The nicotine in the cigarette can cause the blood vessels or the tubes that carries blood in the body to weaken, or they become narrow also. The nicotine also leads to faster heartbeat, and this all leads to an elevated blood pressure. That's why if we will quit smoking, the blood vessels will improve, the blood pressure decreases, and the risk for heart disease or heart attack will also decrease.
Now, aside from smoking, drinking too much alcohol can also increase our blood pressure to unhealthy levels. Having more than 3 drinks temporarily increases the blood pressure, but repeated binge drinking can lead to long-term increases. How does alcohol affect someone's blood pressure?
When a person drinks alcohol, so usually the heart rate increases because it excites our body. And with the increasing heart rate, there would be a concomitant increase in blood pressure. And if there would be a constant exposure to this increase in heart rate, then patient would eventually have long-term hypertension and would not just be a situational increase in blood pressure.
Earlier, you mentioned that one of the really significant factors sa hypertension ay ang genetics or napagmamanahan ito. Now, if someone has a strong familial line of hypertensive parents, grandparents, whatnot, what can they do about this?
Since the genes are unmodifiable, so we cannot modify the genes, what we can do is just to delay the onset of your hypertension. So there have been a lot of genes related to hypertension, and definitely 30 to 60% of hypertensives are still the hereditary ones, the inherited ones. We call it the primary or the essential hypertension. So technically, what we can do is just to delay by modifying our lifestyle.
Now, people with high blood pressure puts themselves at higher risk for COVID-19 due to their weaker immune system. Doc Ome, what can people with hypertension do to protect themselves from coronavirus since it's still with us up to now?
Hypertension will, with the implication of your ACE2 receptors and the abnormalities in your renin-angiotensin system and some other receptors like your toll-like receptors, which is responsible for inflammation. Hypertensive patients are really at risk for acquiring the COVID virus. So what they can do is to just continue their medication so that their blood pressure is within normal levels. Probably it will lower the risk for them to acquire the infection.
Doc Ome, as a follow-up to that, with regards to vaccinations, there's been a lot of conflict, especially when it comes to the vaccination sites. Hindi pumapasa yung mga hypertensives dahil mataas ang BP nila, either hindi nila nakukuha yung booster nila or vaccination nila. What is the current guidelines now? Ano bang dapat alalahanin ng mga hypertensives whenever they get their vaccine or their booster?
They have been instructed to continue their hypertension medications before going to the vaccination site because, Filipinos are really needle phobic. So when they go to a vaccination place, there's an increased stress. So the tendency is for them to elevate their blood pressure. So the better thing to do is before going to the vaccination site, make sure that you take your regular antihypertensive medication.
Now, when left undetected, hypertension can cause a number of problems. When we return, we'll talk about the complications of hypertension. We're your connection to healthcare. You're High blood pressure can silently damage the body for years before showing any symptoms. Uncontrolled high blood pressure can cause disabilities, poor quality of life, or even a heart attack. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and you're watching MedTalk Health Talk. We're together in health. The excessive pressure on your artery walls caused by high blood pressure can damage your blood vessels as well as other organs. Now, the higher the blood pressure and the longer it goes uncontrolled, the greater the damage here. Now, Dr. Ed, what are the most common complications that are caused by consistently elevated, uncontrolled high blood pressure?
There are a lot of complications from uncontrolled high blood pressure. This includes heart attack or stroke, heart failure or inability of the heart to adequately supply oxygen throughout the body. Aneurysm can also arise, which means there is weakening and bulging in the walls of the blood vessels. Patients can also have eye problems like blurring of vision, bleeding in the eyes, or double vision. And long-term, uncontrolled high blood pressure can eventually also damage the kidneys.
Healthy arteries are flexible, they're strong, they're elastic, and their inner lining is smooth so that blood flows freely to supply vital organs and tissues with nutrients as well as oxygen. Now, hypertension gradually increases the pressure of blood flowing through those arteries. Dr. Ed, when it comes to our arteries, a lot of our viewers are familiar with cholesterol and its effects on the heart. What is the relation with this with elevated high blood pressure?
If there is elevated high blood pressure, the arteries in the heart and the rest of the body becomes less elastic. And when they become less elastic, they cannot function well, which is they cannot supply the adequate oxygen and nutrients. Because of this, heart disease can eventually happen. That's why in prolonged and uncontrolled hypertension, patient can have heart failure, or they could also have ischemic heart disease, or the heart muscle not having adequate oxygen, or eventually they could have heart enlargement. And they would feel shortness of breath, they could experience chest pain, or they get tired easily when this happens.
Now, elevated blood pressure, as explained, can cause many heart problems such as coronary artery disease, enlarged left heart, as well as heart failure, as Dr. Ed mentioned. But Dr. Ed, nowadays we associate all of these elevated blood pressure with a certain body type, with diet, too much cholesterol in the diet, too much unhealthy eating or whatnot. But is that the case nowadays? Meron bang itsura ang isang hypertensive? Or can someone look healthy outside but still be hypertensive?
A person can look normal outside, like for example, being on the normal weight, normal build, but can still be hypertensive. And because genetics, as what Dr. Punong Bayan also mentioned, do play a big role in high blood pressure. This brings to the importance of having a regular follow-up and regular monitoring of blood pressure. And other factors like food, obesity could just factor in or further aggravate a person with genetically predisposed condition to develop hypertension.
Now, hypertension can also damage the brain because our brain depends on a nourishing blood supply to work properly. Dr. Ome, can you talk more about high blood pressure and its relation or its risks sa ating brain?
Actually, when we talk about hypertension and brain, we are talking more of the complications of hypertension, which is stroke. And it's around less than 50% of the time, hypertension is the cause of stroke. So this can lead to morbidity, like paralysis or poor quality of life, and some even die because of a certain fatal stroke due to hypertension.
Kidneys filter excess fluid and waste from the blood, a process that requires healthy blood vessels. Now, high blood pressure can damage those blood vessels, as we learned earlier, in and leading towards the kidneys. Dr. Ome, explain natin yon, yung link naman with hypertension and paano naapektuhan ng ating kidneys.
Hypertensive patients has elevated sympathetic tone and endothelial dysfunction. There's also water retention and salt retention. Eventually, will destroy the blood vessels of the kidney. And this will lead, at worst, they go to dialysis.
Let's talk about the eyes, because hypertension can also damage the blood vessels that supply blood to the eyes. And this can cause retinopathy, choroidopathy, or even optic neuropathies. Dr. Ome, pag-usapan naman natin yon, yung link of hypertension sa mata.
Because when you are hypertensive, your blood vessels in the eyes, specifically at the retina, will have some abnormal changes. There will be thickening of your intima, and there will be increased degeneration of the hyalin of the blood vessels of your eyes. Eventually, this will lead into poor circulation, and eventually, this will even cause blindness.
Okay. Now that we know what hypertension can lead to, it's important that we know how to lower. If you've been diagnosed with hypertension, you might think about taking medications to bring your numbers down. But lifestyle plays an important role in lowering your blood pressure as well. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and you're watching MedTalk Health Talk, where your care always comes first. If you successfully control your blood pressure with a healthy lifestyle, you might avoid, delay, or even reduce the need for medications. Dr. Ome, what lifestyle changes should one make to lower their blood pressure?
Diet and lifestyle really has a great impact on the blood pressure. So we have to have a regular exercise, not being sedentary. So at least it's more of most days of the week, at least 30 minutes moderate intensity cardio or aerobic exercise. And definitely we should have a good diet. Specifically, we call a good diet DASH diet approach to stop hypertension. This is composed of whole grains, vegetables and fruit, less of saturated fat and trans fat, high in potassium, and definitely low in sodium. This is a great way to lower your blood pressure as much as 10 millimeters mercury on your systolic blood pressure.
Having high blood pressure typically shows no symptoms, which is why it is important to have yourself checked regularly by a medical expert. But home monitoring can also help you keep tabs on your blood pressure and if certain lifestyle changes are working. Now, make sure to talk to your doctor before you buy a gadget for home monitoring of your blood pressure. Dr. Ed, how can we properly check our BP at home? Let's start first with ano ba yung maganda to have at home? Anong klaseng gadget? We have electronic ones, we have the manual ones, we have the wrist ones even nowadays. What is your recommendation?
For home BP monitoring, since usually it's the person himself will check his blood pressure, it is ideal that he use an electronic or digital BP monitor. It could either be a wrist digital monitor or the arm digital monitor, and make sure it's properly charged or it has an adequate battery so that it could function well. Then he should find a right place, a quiet place where he is relaxed, and then sit down and make sure that there's no tight-fitting clothes affecting the arm where the BP cuff will be placed. After which, place the arm just at the level of the heart and the blood pressure cuff above the elbow.
Okay.
Then the person should keep still and quiet while the machine is taking the blood pressure. Then after taking the measurement, he could take another 2 or 3 readings, then compare it. And ideally, the person should also record the blood pressure measurement so that he could show the readings to his doctor on follow-up.
Now, Dr. Ome, nowadays with technology, there are a lot of gadgets that help with monitoring one's blood pressure. Even watches can do it nowadays. But how accurate are these? Are these something that gives as accurate an information as what hypertension specialists or cardiologists use in their clinic?
Actually, most of the wearables, we call it the wearables, are still in the process of validation. Some of the gadgets can monitor your heart rate, can monitor the calories burned. But regarding the blood pressure, I'll still recommend those machines that has been mentioned by Dr. Ed. So these are more accurate because they are validated already. And fitness trackers are just probably an adjunct to the risk factors, like if you do exercise, how many calories do you burn, what is your target heart rate. Probably this is the practical usability of your tracker to track your physical activity and your parameters while doing some interventions to alleviate your high blood pressure.
Now, this discussion was indeed very helpful. And with that, I'd like to thank cardiologist Dr. Eduardo Yambao Jr. and hypertension specialist Dr. Romel Punongbayan for sharing your expertise with all of us today. Hypertension may be the silent killer, but it can often be prevented or reduced by eating healthy, maintaining proper weight, regular exercise, and not smoking. We want to be your partner for a lifetime of good health. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and this is Med Talk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. We'll see you next time.